Hey, everybody. It's the old NFL Mock Draft Show, part of the Pick Six podcast, exclusively on YouTube Live. It's me, Ryan Wilson, along with Chris Trapasso and Josh Edwards, who covered the draft for CBS Sports. No Will Brinson, added bonus there on this Tuesday afternoon. And as the name implies, we're going to talk about the draft a little bit. So this is our third episode, if you will. We started a few weeks ago. And as always, no matter the year, the conversation sort of begins and ends with the quarterbacks, it feels like. Unfortunately, this isn't last year's draft class, or even the draft class before that, if you're looking for a quarterback. But there's still NFL teams that need quarterbacks, so we're going to talk about them. And I sort of broke them down into tiers, and I'll be interested to hear what you guys think in terms of these tiers and how they work. But I'll start at the top, and I'll throw it out to you, Josh. Tier one, number one for me is Matt Corral, Ole Miss quarterback. Give me your thoughts on Matt Corral and where you might have him ranked if you're an NFL team looking for a QB anywhere in the first round, I guess.
Yeah, so this seems to be a weekly soapbox for me. I get to talk about Matt Corral. Last year, his decision-making wasn't good. This year, it's been much improved. We've talked ad nauseum about his fit in Lane Kiffin's system and how that's going to translate to the NFL. I think you look at the traits that he shows, his touch, his accuracy, his leadership, his ability to throw with accuracy at all three levels, his improved decision-making. I mean, his decision-making over last year has been much improved, and that's what you hope to see from an NFL prospect. That's the opposite of what we've seen from Sam Howell, quite frankly, who we'll discuss later. But Matt Corral, I think, is also my first quarterback, a likely first-round pick, just because need is going to drive those players up the board. And I think we've had this discussion in previous episodes where does QB1 in this draft class fit into last year's draft class? I said last week that I would put Matt Corral ahead of Mac Jones. That's very much up in the air. Yeah, I know. I see Ryan shaking his head. It's very much up in the air. Like I'm very easily convinced that you could put Mac in front of him. I mean, I rank Mac very highly in my rookie rankings each and every week. So I know what he's been able to do for the Patriots. But really, it's all about what you bring to a scheme and what kind of a scheme is going to fit each of these quarterbacks.
So, Chris, let me ask you. I've had Matt Corral going to the football team probably the last 3 or 4 mock drafts because they're the first team up and they clearly need a quarterback. But to Josh's point, I don't know if that's a good fit because Mac Jones, for as much as I love him, if he ended up with the Lions, he'd be terrible, and that's the situation of him going to the right spot. Where are you on Matt Corral in terms of where you have him ranked as your list of quarterbacks, and where might be the best first great fit for Matt Corral as we go down the draft rankings here?
Well, yeah, this is kind of boring. He is my quarterback number one. I think we're all on that train at this point, but it's like feels weird because the last couple of drafts with Joe Burrow and then Trevor Lawrence and then the 2018 draft class and Kyler Murray in 2019, there was like this slam dunk quarterback number one. For most people. And this year, there's not a lot of excitement. Like me touting a QB1 feels like a mid to late first round type of talent. I wouldn't hate the Washington football team. I think the fact that in this offense, Taylor Heineke's had a couple 300-yard games. He's made some bad decisions, but you have Terry McLaurin. We haven't really seen a lot of Curtis Samuel, but he's presumably a building block for the future. The defense probably should be better next year under Ron Rivera. So I wouldn't hate the Washington football team inside the top 10. In a vacuum, is Matt Corral a top 10 prospect? No, but to Josh's point, every year the quarterbacks get driven up the board. And I think with Matt Corral, I like that. Just a quick note on his game stylistically. I like that he has a pretty strong arm and a very quick release. And I think that really helps him put up those big numbers in Lane Kiffin's offense, that there's a lot of screens. There's a ton of RPOs, which of course are becoming more prevalent at the NFL level, but it's not just a lot of good running from him, better decision-making, but it's the accuracy, and it gets rid of the football in a hurry almost every single play.
It's funny you mentioned that because I'm sort of with you guys in terms of comparing Matt Corral to last year's draft class, and he's probably coming in 4th or 5th, maybe even 6th. I don't know. We'll have to read. Zach Wilson has done himself no favors. Again, landing spot makes a difference unless you're Mike White. But I will say this. After watching the way Justin Fields played last night, I feel like Matt Corral could have done some of those things for the Bears. Mm-hmm. He's not as good as Justin Fields. I think we all agree on that in terms of coming out of college. Justin Fields was more consistent, I felt like. But Josh had noted that Corral's having a fantastic year. The turnovers have gone. He's making a lot of good decisions. But I feel like with the athleticism, the RPO stuff you mentioned, Traps, I think Corral could have had some success against the Steelers in that Monday night game, and a game that the Bears should have won. So that gives me some hope that maybe there's some translatability for Matt Corral going from Ole Miss and a Lane Kiffin offense that doesn't seem to translate well for some of his quarterbacks to the NFL. But we'll see. And full disclosure, Carson Strong is my QB1. It's just the knee. The knee is the big issue for me, and we'll see what NFL teams will probably be a bigger issue for them. I wish he were 100% healthy because I do love the idea of Carson Strong, sort of the non-Power 5 guy, having a chance to be QB1. So let's go to Carson Strong. So, Traps, I'll start with you. I had him going 13th to the Panthers. I think Sam Darnold. Adam Gase isn't the problem, it turns out. Sam Darnold's the problem, and Adam Gase should put that on his resume. But I had him going 13th to the Panthers. Where are you on Carson Strong? Plays Nevada. Every week in, week out, he's putting up big numbers. But again, for me, the big issue is the knee.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Panthers would be a good fit with Joe Brady there. What I think for Carson Strong, running that air raid style at Nevada, he needs to be in an offense that's going to ask him to get the ball out quickly and then take some vertical shots. And I totally agree with you. Like watching, like I went and did like a mid-season regrade of these quarterbacks. Watching Carson Strong, like he can't move. Like he and even by today's standards or even 10 years ago standards, in terms of athleticism at the quarterback spot, you can tell that his knee just doesn't fire like it did earlier in his career. I don't know if he re-injured it just from high school, but to me, that's a big problem. Like if you can't move and make those off structure plays in today's NFL, you need to be super accurate. You need to process lightning fast. And I don't know if Carson Strong is the most accurate or the quickest processor that I've seen. But I do like how well he drops the ball into the bucket down the field. The accuracy isn't a huge issue, I don't think. And the experience and, years of productivity, I think it's easy to kind of gloss over when you're just watching one season of all these quarterbacks. But Carson Strong has been productive in a high volume passing offense for many seasons. And it seems like the Panthers will probably move on from Sam Darnold after just trading a bunch of picks for him just a couple months ago.
Yeah, you have to move on, Sam. I can't envision a situation where he comes back unless an asteroid hits a bus full of every other quarterback left on the planet, and Sam Darnold's not on that bus. Josh, let me ask you this about Carson Strong. You're a Browns guy. I'm a Steelers guy. As a Browns supporter, would you rather see the Steelers start Matt Corral next year or Carson Strong, assuming he's 98% healthy?
Oh, Carson Strong 100%, because then I could just watch Myles Garrett tee off on him. His mobility is a concern, and if you don't have the mobility to be one of those upper echelon quarterbacks, I think you have to have just elite passing skills, and I don't see that from Carson Strong this year. I haven't been as impressed with him this year. So for me, he's more down in the tier 3 range. I think he's I still think there's going to be teams that are willing to take a chance on the traits and the upside that he possesses, which makes him that perfect day 2 option, in my opinion. I just haven't seen what I had wanted to see from Strong coming into this season. So I'm looking at actually Pittsburgh, the Saints, maybe the Broncos as possible fits for him. So obviously, right off the top there, I mentioned Pittsburgh. How do you feel about the possibility of Carson Strong in the Steel City?
He has to be healthy. That's the first checkbox. But Traps alluded to it. He's not particularly mobile. He can throw the ball downfield with some accuracy. Sounds like the guy they got right now, except he's gotten worse in terms of throwing the ball down the field. Now, if it's a situation where Roethlisberger is more athletic than Carson Strong, then clearly you have to mark him off your list. I don't know. Again, if Carson Strong's healthy, I don't know who I want more in Pittsburgh. The offensive line is getting incrementally better. They haven't made huge strides, but they were terrible to start the season. I'm a little nervous about Matt Corral translating to the NFL coming from Lane Kiffin's system, and maybe that won't be an issue, and that'll be great for Matt Corral. But there's a history there. I like Carson Strong a lot more than you do, it sounds like, Josh. So you have him as a second, third round guy right now?
Yeah, I think he's at the top of the tier 3 for me. He's in that group, and we'll discuss it a little bit more. But my tiers, I've got tier 1, tier 2. It's pretty small at this point, I think, compared to a lot of people. So I think once you get into that tier 3, you're really banking on the traits and the upside.
Okay, so let me ask you this, and Traps, you can follow up. So I like to do compare guys because that sort of helps over the years. So let's go to last year's class. So you have him second, third round guy. So rank these guys: Kyle Trask, Kellen Mond, Davis Mills, and Carson Strong. All those guys went very late second, early third last year, I believe.
Yeah, so I would, in order, I would probably take Davis Mills, Kyle Trask, Carson Strong. Maybe the margin between Carson Strong and Kellen Mond is probably the slimmest for me, but that would be how I see how it shakes out, because I think those other three guys have the leadership. They've got the accuracy that, at least lead me to believe they're going to be able to translate and at least hold off or be one of these successful long-term veterans in the NFL.
That's funny because I love Kellen Mond and
I know
Carson
you did.
Strong. And those guys are the last place for you. So clearly you have a first round grade right now, Traps, on Strong?
Right at the end of the first round, early second. That's kind of where I viewed him after this rewatch. It's like mid-season reevaluation.
So I'm assuming you would have him above the three quarterbacks I mentioned who went round 2, round 3.
Yeah, I would. I just looked at my grading system that I had and literally compared the grades. Last year I had Trey Lance and then a huge gap to your boy Mac Jones. I have Carson Strong right in the middle of those two. So he would have been my, quarterback 4 or 5 in last year's draft class. But that would have, if you also put in this whole year's draft class, with Matt Corral, he would have fallen further down the list. But of those day 2 guys, I like Carson Strong more than Kyle Trask, more than Kellen Mond, and those guys that went in the second or third round in 2021.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is that you guys, Josh in particular, hates immobile quarterbacks. Max Strong is going to bring back the lack of mobility as a strength, not a weakness. It's a bug, not a feature.
I like that you just said Mac Strong there because you combined your two
there you go.
together. That was perfect.
That's how I think of Mac Jones. Despite that filthy play on, who was the Panthers defender whose leg?
Brian Burns.
Oh,
that was Brian Burns. Oh,
yeah.
I can't defend that, Mac. You got to be better than that. Is Brian Burns okay?
He
played later in the game, I think.
Oh, okay. I look Josh trying to play it up. I hit his leg.
It's probably one of those injuries where you're able to play through it because of the adrenaline, but you wake up Monday morning, you're like, man, this ankle really hurts right now.
And you can't go off the
gator
field.
roll.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it didn't look good on the rewatch. I missed it the first time around. All right, let's get to tier 2. So tier 1 was pretty small for me. Do you guys have anyone in your tier 1s besides Corral and Strong? And by that I mean guys who go in the top 32 picks. Josh?
Yeah, so I'll throw Malik Willis out there.
Okay.
I do like Malik Willis. Obviously, he's got some room for growth. Great mobility. At the same time, his processing has to be quicker. He holds onto the ball too long, which, could be a byproduct of the fact that he's on a Liberty team that when they're on TV, they're typically playing a better Power 5 opponent. So, he understandably is trying to impress in those games. So I think holding on to the ball too long is one issue that he's had. But I don't want to make the Michael Vick comparison, but it's funny that you can kind of see some similarities in their game. He's got this similar sidearm release that Vick had. He's got long speed. There's a lot of room for growth for Malik Willis. But I think if you're talking about a guy that you could potentially take in the first round, allow that mobility to develop, allow him some time to develop as a passer. I think he's got that kind of a skill set. So that's the only other guy that I would throw into tier 1 right now.
Well, tier 2, Malik Willis falls in there for me. And it sounds like I agree with you in the sense that he's not a first round pick for me. I had him going in my first round last week for the first time ever prior to the Ole Miss game. The Ole Miss game did not go well for him or that Liberty. I mean, the offensive line played terribly. Let's be honest, not all on Malik Willis, but there are people watching him play and having to figure out how that translates. And that's the question for me. You don't want to shut down a player because he has a bad few games, unless he's Spencer Rattler. But seriously, the thing with you have to be able to sort of visualize what this will look like in 2 or 3 or 4 years when you're determining whether you're going to take a quarterback or not. And Malik Willis, for me, I would take him in the second round all day long, probably mid-second round. And you're taking a chance on, it's a 35% probability maybe that you hit a home run and 65% chance that you're going to strike out. And that's okay when you're talking about a quarterback. It's not okay if you're talking about another position that you take in the second round and overvalue. Traps, let me ask you, is there anyone else in the tier 1 in terms of round 1-ish guys that you had that I didn't have outside of Corral and Strong?
What about Kenny Pickett? Kenny Pickett is kind of becoming my guy in this draft class. I know he's old. He's like going to be 24 in his rookie season. And he's played a lot better he did not seem like a high volume passer last season or at any point during his Pitt career. And he's had a bunch of 400-yard games this year. I think he's got the arm strength. The accuracy is pretty good. Only a couple interceptions. And his improvisation, he's not to the level of Malik Willis or even Matt Corral, but I think he's athletic enough to make some defenders miss to extend plays. So I think Kenny Pickett could be a sneaky, late first round guy. I've just been really impressed by the growth that he's shown in one off season.
That's the thing. He last year, watching him over the summer, he was a day 3 guy all day long. And then he's balled out for sure. I don't love him as much as most people. I had him going in my latest first round mock draft, 28th to the Lions. He replaced Malik Willis essentially. But if you're pushing me, I only have 2 guys with first round grades, the guys that I mentioned. But Kenny Pickett, my concerns with him aren't the age. I'm fine with that, actually. That may scare Josh off because it conjures memories of Brandon Whedon. I don't know. But the thing with Kenny Pickett is he is athletic, as you note. He can run, and he's pretty good at it. I feel like in some of the games that I've watched this year, he's missed guys who are running wide open to take the safer underneath stuff. And that's not terrible, but at some point when you have a chance to move the sticks, you need to do it, especially once you get to the next level. But if you can, try to guess what the growth is going to be like from this year to years 1, 2, and 3 from now, based on what we saw from the growth in the last 9, 10, 12 months, that can be pretty enticing. Josh, where are you on Kenny Pickett, who, as I like Malik, I had him as a tier 2 guy?
Yeah, so full disclosure, I don't have a first-round grade on any of these guys. I mean, they're within my 32 prospects, but for the sake of context, our grading scale amounts to a first-round grade is a guy that you see all-pro potential, and I don't see that from any of these quarterbacks just yet. With that being said, I have Kenny Pickett at the top of my tier 2 as a possible late first round because of need. Again, teams that need a quarterback might be enticed to take him at the bottom of the first round. That's why I look at a team like the Saints or a team like the Steelers who may not have the luxury to take one of these guys that we have rated higher because they're picking so far late into the first round that maybe you have to get a guy like Kenny Pickett who's a little farther down the board. But one team, I kind of want to go back to this because I'm curious of your thoughts on this. When we talk about Malik Willis, we talk about Matt Corral, and all the quarterback needy teams that might be in the market when we talk about the 2022 draft. What about Minnesota as a team that takes – I know Kellen Mond, I'm not trying to start anything here, but Minnesota is a team that potentially invests in one of these 2 young guys in that Gary Kubiak-style offense.
It's funny you mentioned Kirk Cousins, because I was just thinking Kenny Pickett is actually a more athletic version of Kirk Cousins for me. I feel like Kirk Cousins gets comped to a lot of guys who you just don't know how to categorize, and maybe that's what I'm doing there. But I like Kenny Pickett. I don't know if I like him more than Kirk Cousins, but to your point, Josh, Kirk Cousins was a 4th-round pick, and he was the second quarterback taken by Washington after the RG3 pick in the top 3 or whatever that was. I don't hate it if I'm the Vikings. I'm sure Mike Zimmer would like to draft only defensive players because of the way that team insists on losing football games. What do you think, Traps, about Pickett to the Vikes?
Well, I think we would have to talk to Rick Spielman or Mike Zimmer in that how do they want to move forward if they still have their jobs and can maintain them into 2022? Do you want, like Josh is kind of insinuating, like a Kirk Cousins 2.0 that can run the system well? Or do you finally want to break free of maybe the limits of a Kirk Cousins style quarterback and draft Malik Willis? Yeah, you're definitely rolling the dice a little bit more, but then you could enter potentially into this new era of the NFL with Justin Herbert and with Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, and these young quarterbacks that can make plays on the run. So it's like you can look at one school of thought and say they like this, Kubiak style quarterback, or are they going to finally say, hey, we've seen the ceiling with Kirk Cousins style. Let's move forward with someone more athletic that has more upside.
I'll close with this because I do think, I was insinuating that they should possibly take Malik Willis or Matt Corral there because of the style of offense that they run and employ. At the same time, if I recall, the Vikings, there were reports out that they were interested in possibly moving up to get Justin Fields, right? So there's at least some interest in potentially making a change.
One other thing that I want to mention on Malik Willis, just before we move on to tier 3 or whatever, to me with Malik Willis, and it's kind of what I just mentioned about like the upside and like Ryan was saying, 35% chance if you pick one of those guys in the second round that they're going to hit. In watching Malik Willis, and then we do a lot of comparisons to last year's draft class, Trey Lance went inside the top 3 and was picked by a team that traded multiple picks to move up to get him. I don't think there is that seismic of a gap between Trey Lance as a prospect and Malik Willis as a prospect. I think if Malik Willis was on the North Dakota State Bison and they were just trampling over every team they were playing at the FCS level, he could have had a 28 touchdown, no interception season. They're similar style runners. They're pretty athletic and they're like deceptively powerful through contact. The accuracy isn't great. They might be very raw in terms of reading coverages. The big plays down the field are there. So I'm a little bit higher on Willis. I certainly can see his weaknesses. But if you're really just talking about, and we are kind of talking about the need at the position and how that always pushes up even lesser quarterback prospects, I just feel like if Malik Willis ultimately goes in the second round when Trey Lance was just picked at number 3 overall by a team that traded up for him, then something's not computing right with how the NFL is evaluating these prospects.
Yeah, I always come back to, I love Kyle Shanahan, the coordinator. I don't know if Kyle Shanahan making personnel decisions is in the best interest of the 49ers. And
that's a good point.
I'm just being real. Look, I mean, you can get mad or whatever, but that's just, I'm looking at this team and they're not winning football games, and some of that has to do with the people on the field.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's a fair point, Traps, because Trey Lance, I think part of the issue for me trying to evaluate him, he didn't play last year because they didn't have a season except for that silly showcase game. Played FCS, played in a run-heavy system, and you didn't have a lot to go on except for what you saw in 2019. And then it's just more projection at that point, and you can fall in love with guys for sure. And I get that, and clearly Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers did, and we'll see how it works out. We don't know if Trey Lance is going to get it or not because he hasn't really played much. But that's certainly a fair point. And maybe it's sort of the yo-yo goes in the other direction, and you're much more conservative about going after those type of players where you don't know a lot about, or there are some deficiencies that you can't project into how quickly they can be cleaned up going forward. There's a lot to like about Malik Willis for sure. I mean, there's and Josh noted this. None of these quarterbacks should be going to the top 10, but they're teams that need quarterbacks. So we'll see how the offseason sorts itself out with the free agent quarterbacks and where these guys end up, and then what's left over will determine how this works for these quarterbacks we're talking about here. So the last guy in my tier 2 is the guy that I want to be better, but he just hasn't been. I didn't like him. I didn't love him last year. I liked him fine. He was on a great football team, and that's UNC Sam Howell, and we talk about it every week. He lost Daz Newsome, De'Ami Brown, Javonte Williams, Michael Carter, and he has struggled, and that's not entirely his fault. Downs, the wide receiver, stepped up and made some big plays, but that team is not very good in terms of consistency. Sam Howell has certainly played better as the season has progressed. He got up to a terrible start against Virginia Tech in a game that Tech played extremely well on defensively. But I would not take him in the first round no matter what. His footwork is out of this world, not great. It's gotten better from last season when I watched him. But if your footwork is terrible and you have trouble with accuracy, I don't know how that's magically going to fix itself by the time you get to the NFL in time for you to play pretty early on in your rookie season if you're a top 32 pick. Traps, where are you at on Sam Howell? Is he a tier 2, tier 1, tier 3? Where do you got him?
To me, he's like near the top of tier 3. And I think that assessment is a very good one. What I don't like about him is that he seems to look at that first read a lot. And then if it's not there, his eyes drop and he turns into a running back in the backfield. And I think like for the ACC, he would be probably considered decently athletic. Is he going to be able to run through linebackers and make cornerbacks miss in space in the NFL? No. Kind of feels like, and this has been the comparison, and I want to hear Josh's thoughts on this, like Baker Mayfield at Oklahoma. Like he was a pretty mobile quarterback in the Big 12, made some plays with his legs, but in the NFL, we've seen that like that is not really translatable for that type of athlete. And certainly Baker was way more accurate, got through his reads a lot more or a lot quicker, and was not someone that instantly morphed into a running back if his first read was covered. I like the big play ability with Sam Howell. He likes to still stretch it deep even without some of those weapons that he lost to the NFL. And you're right, he has played a little bit better, but he, to me, feels like the round 2 or round 3 roll of the dice. If you can settle his footwork and calm him down in the pocket, you could get a quality quarterback because the arm talent is there. And we saw some of those big time throws at like in his freshman and his sophomore seasons, but he's almost taken a step back as the talent around him has left for the NFL.
You're right about I feel like with you, I'm with you that the first read isn't there. He tries to run, and he's not Malik Willis. He's not even Baker Mayfield in terms of if Baker Mayfield were in this draft class, he'd be the QB1 all day long. I don't think there'd be much conversation. Josh, I have Sam Howell going below Kyle Trask and Kellen Mond and Davis Mills. I don't even know if I suppose it's close on some level. Maybe you don't like Kellen Mond as much as I do, but I don't get the allure of Sam Howell. Can you sell me on any of that?
I could have given a valiant effort at the start of the season. I'm not as eager to defend him as I was back then because I did like the Baker Mayfield comparisons. He's a fiery leader. He was accurate. And then you take away all those weapons that they had last year. And like Trapp said, we've started to see more issues. His downfield accuracy has been pretty poor, footwork in the pocket. Like you're starting to see maybe a lack of confidence kind of leak into his technique. His discipline, his mechanics, all of that kind of stuff. So maybe he's still the same quarterback that we had seen last year. Maybe he's just a late day 2, day 3 type quarterback that I think he's put on tape this year. I'm a little disappointed in what I've seen from Sam Howell, and I don't know whether that's to blame the talent that's around him or him himself. Like I think at some point, if you're one of those transcendent quarterbacks, you've got to be able to uplift what's around you and not be the, tractor trailer that's getting pulled by those guys.
Yeah, I was actually trying to go ahead, Chris.
No, I think he should just stay at UNC for another year with all the hype that he had coming into his season. It's like a similar drop off, but not nearly as bad as Spencer Rattler. Like heading into the summer or into the season, just watching them over the summer, like us, other outlets were like, hey, it's Spencer Rattler and Sam Howell. Who's going in the top 10? Spencer Rattler we talked about it, I think last week or in episode 1, he should either transfer, stay at Oklahoma, whatever, stay in school. Sam Howell has no momentum. Like we always talk about draft stock. I don't think anyone is nearly as excited about Sam Howell this year as they were last year. He still has another year left where he could stay at UNC, kind of rehabilitate his draft stock, work on all the things that we're kind of pinpointing about his game that are weaknesses, and then enter next year, or the 2023 draft class that's not as crowded with these, 5 or 6 guys where we're not really sure, are they second rounders, third rounders, fourth rounders. If he has a strong 2022 at North Carolina, then I think we could be talking about him as a top half of the first round pick.
And to follow up on that, and I think I'm going to say this every week just so I don't forget it, but also just so it can stay in the back of their minds. Do not, under any circumstances, get caught up in pro days. I was thinking about this last night watching Justin Fields. Justin Fields slung it at his pro day. It doesn't matter. He got sacked 9 times by the Browns. The offensive line sucked. Then he played really well last night. Zach Wilson had the best pro day since Johnny Manziel. Both quarterbacks don't look like they're going to be very good. Zach Wilson obviously has a long time to prove himself, but it's been a slow start for him. And people couldn't quit talking about how great Zach Wilson was. So if Sam Howell has a fantastic pro day, it literally means nothing unless he's going to play in a flag football league. It means absolutely nothing. It's good for him that he goes out there and completes passes. I get all that. But Josh, you mentioned at some point you have to be able to lift your teammates up if you're a true Trevor Lawrence type player or whatever. Is there an example of a quarterback who did that his final year of college and went on to have some success? Because none comes to mind that if you're, sort of laying turds with not great players around you, you don't magically become an all-star once you join the Detroit Lions, where inevitably good quarterbacks go.
Yeah, nobody immediately comes to mind, but I do want to point out that you've now mentioned Johnny Manziel and Brandon Weeden. So you're giving a whole new meaning to tears as we work our way through this through this broadcast. But no, I can't immediately think of anybody that has been able to turn it on and become that the guy that's pulling everybody else, the guy that's rallying everybody around him. I mean, Baker is a guy that was incredibly accurate in college, and he had a lot of talent around him.
And he overcame a lot because he was a walk-on that transferred and then parlayed that into being the number 1 overall pick.
Right. So you look for the adversity that some of these guys have gone through, and maybe that's going to keep them self-motivated to have that NFL success. But, when we talk about these quarterbacks, there's only – I mean, how many active NFL quarterbacks right now would you say are the types of players that can actually put their teams on the back and overcome their circumstances? I mean, would you say it's more or less than 8?
10 was the number I was going to put out there.
10.
I think it's under 10.
Yeah.
No, I think that's right. It's incredibly difficult, and that's why this isn't a science. It's just you have no idea. Like, at the end of the day, we have no idea how this is going to work out, unless, of course, you're on the Mac Jones train. But that's only one person. Not only on this podcast.
The only quarterback I can think of is the quarterback that I watch the most is Josh Allen. That Josh Allen at Wyoming, that team was not very good. They won 8-5. They won a bowl game. There was a couple players that are on practice squads that were on that Wyoming team, but he's really the only one that when Josh was answering, I was trying to rack my own brain of like which quarterback in his final season elevated a lesser team. Josh Allen really is the only one, especially in recent history, that instantly comes to mind as someone that did that. And now he's, become one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL.
That's a good one too, and that's part of that sort of 35-40% thing I was talking about, because there were a lot of questions about Josh Allen. He came out not very accurate. He wasn't accurate when he got to the NFL, and he's made himself into one of the best players in the NFL. So that's, you roll the dice if you're Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott, and it pays off handsomely. And he's worth every penny of what they paid him on that new contract. That's a good call. So we have literally one quarterback that fits the criteria of what we're looking for. All right, those are the tier 2 guys for me. Let's go to tier 3, and you guys can tell me how you have these players ranked and add any names that I have left out. I'll just mention the list, and then Josh, I'll start with you, and you can take whichever name you want or name that you prefer to talk about, and we'll sort of go through these. Desmond Ridder, Phil Jurkovec, who actually magically came back. He's healthy. That's great news for Boston College and for people who want to watch him. Jayden Daniels at Arizona State, Kedon Slovis at USC, and Jake Haener out of Fresno, who Traps talked about last week. Josh, any of those names you like better than the others? Anyone you want to add to that list?
Yeah, thank you for picking my name first, because I'm afraid Traps was going to use his time to talk about this guy. It's Fresno State quarterback Jake Haener. Incredibly tough guy, very accurate. Washington transfer. He was the guy that got beat out by Jacob Eason there for the Huskies. He transfers to Fresno State. Just a gritty performer, man. I mean, he's just been fantastic this year. He's uplifted his team to a couple of upsets. I've got him in my tier 2. So my tier 2 is Kenny Pickett and Jake Haener, because I see at least some traits that are going to translate to at least NFL backup long term, and potentially one of those spot starters that we've come to know and appreciate in recent weeks with the Colt McCoys, the Case Keenums, guys like that.
And Josh, by the way, it's important to understand as you're sort of listening to this, that these guys aren't all going to be starters, but you need competent backups, because otherwise you roll out guys out there who are going to get you crushed.
No question. I mean, Dallas over the past couple of years, look at the struggles that they've had without a backup quarterback ready to come in for Dak Prescott, except for Cooper Rush a couple weeks ago. Obviously, that was a bit of an outlier. But we look back to the 2020 season, and the way that team struggled in the absence of Dak Prescott. I mean, it's everything to have a competent backup quarterback if you plan to be a championship contender, because who knows when your starter may miss a couple of weeks. A couple of weeks in the NFL could be the difference between you getting the 1 seed. It could be the difference in you even making the playoffs. So it's very important to have those quality backups, and I think Jake Haener at the very least can be one of those guys.
Traps, who sticks out to you on this list? Is there a name you want to add?
Those two, Desmond Ridder and Jake Haener. And I think with Haener, and this might sound like a hot take, but if you really think about it, I don't think it's crazy. He has a chance to be the best value pick at the quarterback spot, because he's only, been on the draft radar for 1 season basically this year. And he's small. Like, he's listed at like 6'1", 185 or 190. I don't even know if he's that big. And I think the NFL has gotten a little bit smarter with like, hey, if you're 6 foot, 6'1", but you can throw the ball with enough velocity and accuracy, you can move around a little bit. We'll, not draft you in the 7th round, but he feels like someone that a lot of draft Twitter like us will like a lot, but the NFL will say 4th, 5th, 6th round for him. But he can play, like the accuracy, decision making, like Josh mentioned, the toughness. There's a couple 4th quarter comebacks where he's taking shots in the pocket but still delivering the football down the field. And Desmond Ridder, I think his traits aren't as impressive as the team that he's on, how open some of those receivers get for Cincinnati. They're usually playing teams lesser than them. But I think that will ultimately lead to him being drafted. And I think in the right system, he could be that spot starter that, goes 1-1 and doesn't play terrible football for you in year 2 or year 3 in the NFL. The one thing with Desmond Ridder is that he doesn't look like he has an NFL body. And like Jayden Daniels, I don't know if those guys have ever been in the weight room in college. And I saw that tweet yesterday that Lamar Jackson said that in high school, he like never hit the weights. I'm like, okay, high school, you're 16, 17, 18 years old. But in college, at like a marquee program or even just a D1 program, I'm just surprised that you can be like 6'4" and 200 pounds like Desmond Ridder is and just not have an NFL body in your final season as you're entering the NFL. It's just really weird to me.
Yeah, although worth noting, Trevor Lawrence was like 6'6", 215. I think we had his pro day because he had shoulders, whatever the surgery was that kept him out at the end of the year. Although he takes a ton of hits. There's the Lamar Jackson tweet Devo put on the screen for watching on YouTube. Definitely never touched the weights in high school. It actually worked out okay for him. The thing with Desmond Ridder for me, I want to like him more. The decision making is problematic. He misses some throws and again, this is sort of the thing we said about a lot of these guys, but you need to be more consistent if you want to be a first round pick. He is, I can't envision a situation where he goes in the first round. Crazier things have happened, I suppose, but he feels like you take a flyer on late day 2. Again, I'm taking Kyle Trask, Davis Mills, Kellen Mond before Desmond Ridder, or maybe early day 3. And you don't have to be a starter to reiterate that point, as Josh was noting. You need good backup quarterbacks to have some success. I'll mention Kedon Slovis quickly. I wanted him to have a better season. I don't know how he could have had a worse season. Obviously, JT Daniels lost his job when he got hurt. Slovis took over, played really well. Daniels is now in Georgia. And Slovis just hasn't been able to put it together. He is, I mean, if you think Carson Strong really bums you out in terms of lack of mobility, do not watch Kedon Slovis because that's going to make you angry. But I thought he got rid of the ball quickly. I thought he knew where to go with the ball when I was watching him over the summer. He made good decisions, and a lot of that stuff has gone out the window. He's basically, and I don't know what you think of this, Traps. He's basically Matt Barkley.
Yeah. I think that's a really good comparison because Barkley got a lot of draft hype. Some people thought even after the season, his final season at USC, that was 2013 draft class. I think I remember because the Bills drafted EJ Manuel in that draft class in the first round.
That was 2013.
But it was like Matt Barkley and Ryan Nassib, and people were trying to make these guys top-tier prospects. The mobility's not there, and the arm strength is not there with Kedon Slovis. I think you're right. The decision-making is pretty good. The accuracy is good. But like we mentioned earlier, in today's NFL, and I think even more so than just this trend of these Justin Herbert and Josh Allen types, we're seeing of late, like, there's not a ton of teams that have like high caliber offensive lines that are protecting on every snap really well. That's why I think we've pushed into this new era where you need to be so good off structure because there's just 3 or 4 teams or 5 teams that have really good offensive lines. That's why you have to be athletic. So I think Kedon Slovis faces a huge uphill battle. I think at this point to even be drafted because the traits, the physical athleticism and the arm strength are just not there. You need to be literally Drew Brees in terms of how well you process and how hyper accurate you are. And I think those are strengths of Slovis's game, but he's not to Drew Brees' level in either of those areas.
Josh, I know you're a Kentucky guy and you watch a lot of SEC football. And I was doing HQ yesterday with Danny Cannell, and he threw this name out. And I've seen him play just while watching other guys, but Tennessee's Hendon Hooker, who has had a fantastic season. And again, you watch other guys and out of the corner, I go, oh, this guy's making some throws. I didn't think much of it. But as I looked up his numbers this year, he's a senior, so this is it for him. I don't think he can come back for the COVID exemption, but he has 21 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He's completed 70% of his passes. He's 6'4", 220-ish. I don't know if you've seen him at all or Traps, if you've seen him at all. Any thoughts on him as a possible guy to keep an eye out for as a day 3 sort of, you like to say sleeper, Traps, as a sleeper type player?
I haven't really watched him yet, but if I'm not mistaken, he was a pretty big recruit, and Josh is probably the better guy to talk to about the recruit rankings. I think in general, from just watching Tennessee games, just kind of glimpsing at them like throughout the season and seeing how Hooker has played, he has a chance to be that Davis Mills type that started 15 games at Stanford, but was a big recruit, has the size and the arm. And that's kind of where I'm leaning in terms of how the league feels about what the prerequisites are to just even be drafted at the NFL level, that there'll be those head scratching picks where how Davis Mills can go in the third round. Well, it's because he has the traits that if coached up and if in the right situation with good receivers, which none of which he has in Houston, by the way, you can ultimately be a successful quarterback. So I haven't really watched extensively on Hooker, but I think he kind of has that makeup to potentially be that day 3 guy, or maybe even late day 2 pick that rises up draft boards really late in the pre-draft process.
Hendon Hooker transferred from Tech too. He played there from 2017 to 2020, and I guess old Triple B there took over for him. Josh, have you seen him at all? Has Kentucky played Tennessee yet?
Last week, actually.
Oh, what do you got?
Unfortunately, Kentucky's brought out the accuracy in both Will Rogers at Mississippi State and Hendon Hooker at Tennessee. Hendon Hooker's been playing fantastic this year. I mean, Tennessee has really struggled to get any consistent quarterback play in recent years. Jarrett Garantano was one of them. They've had some other guys that have since transferred out of the program. Hendon Hooker has been that lightning rod that they've been missing. A guy that's capable of getting yardage on the ground on third down. His accuracy has been very improved. I mean, he's been the leader that team has needed. They've always recruited well, and now you're kind of seeing a quarterback that's capable of playing at a high level come in and really lead that team. So I think maybe day 3, possibly a UDFA kind of guy, but a guy that certainly has helped his stock and is a great example of somebody that has entered the transfer portal and made the most of their new opportunity.
Yeah, that sort of reminds me of last year. There was a lot of conversation around Felipe Franks. He transferred from Florida, went to Arkansas. I thought he played okay at Arkansas, went undrafted, but he is an absolute specimen. 6'6", he's probably 225, 230. He actually got on the field for the Falcons this weekend. He came in I said, oh my God, they're running RPOs with Matt Ryan. And I took a closer look. I said, oh no, thank God that's Felipe Franks, because that could have been a disaster situation. So there are places in the league for guys who aren't quite yet developed. And that's sort of what we're talking about with these guys who go day 3. I mean, if you're a second round pick, the hope, third round pick, the hope is that you're going to play as potentially a starter, but certainly day 3 guys are guys that you try to develop. And if you get something out of them in a pinch, that's all great news. So Hendon Hooker is a guy that I'm adding to the list. Any other quarterbacks that I haven't mentioned in your tier 3s that are worth making a note on?
Yeah, I'll start. Looking at Jesse's comment there. Bailey Zappi from Western Kentucky has gotten a lot of hype this year.
By the way, Josh, Western Kentucky secretly has the best football program in the nation. Every time you look at an NFL roster, there's someone from Western Kentucky on that roster. Higbee went to – I didn't know this till this weekend. Tyler Higbee went to Western Kentucky. Of course, Mike White did. And there's another quarterback that went to Western Kentucky as well, whose name's escapes me. But go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, they had Noah Spence, the transfer from Ohio State a couple of years ago. They've got D'Angelo Malone, the edge rusher this year. Outside of Bailey Zappi, the one guy that I like quite a bit is Cole Johnson from James Madison. 6'6", beanpole kind of guy, but strong
Josh is
arm,
deep into the rankings.
capable of distributing it at all 3 levels. So I'm curious to see if he's going to be a guy that potentially gets a senior bowl invite, or is able to make the most of his postseason opportunities, because I think there is some talent there to be cultivated.
You got anybody, Josh? I mean, Traps, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I do. Anthony Brown from Oregon. The passing stats are pretty low volume, and they want to run the football. He's played in a couple rain games like this past weekend against Washington. He was at Boston College, and he is a very talented runner. He's not crazy explosive, but they used him in the design run game a lot in Boston College. They've done that this season at Oregon. If you go back early in the season when they beat Ohio State, in Columbus, Anthony Brown probably had one of his better passing games in that contest. But if we're talking about, Felipe Franks, or even Sam Ellinger has been on the field for some wildcat type runs to spell Carson Wentz this season for the Colts, Anthony Brown, because of the athletic traits that he already has and the fact that he's played a lot of football, he looks to be improving a little bit as a passer, but is super raw. 6th or 7th round, I could see him being selected if he continues, down the stretch. Maybe Oregon gets into the college football playoff. If he continues down the stretch, we could see him go late just because of the athleticism, the running ability, and a team could pick him and then try to cultivate him as a passer once he gets to the NFL.
And the other thing to keep in mind is that a lot of times we go through all these quarterbacks by the time we get to the draft. Maybe only 6 or 7 or 8 guys end up getting drafted. You get a couple guys in free agency. Traps, who was the left-handed Buffalo quarterback from a few years ago that 6'6"? He's actually been converted to tight end now. Tyree Jackson. Tyree Jackson. I mean, that's an example of a guy you take a flyer on, you see what happens. It didn't quite work out at quarterback, and you try and see what happens next. I mean, the same thing with Logan Thomas. Logan Thomas was a quarterback at Tech, and now he's a great tight end. But you draft the athletes, you try to see what you can get out on the practice squad, and sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. But it's the hardest position to play on planet Earth, so it's the expectations have to be, although there never are, have to be manageable. Debo, we got another question. All right, Jesse Clark writes, where do you rank Jerome Ford among the running backs in this draft? Traps? Josh? Have you seen? I have not seen Jerome Ford yet.
I haven't watched him extensively yet. I did see a little bit, here and there of Cincinnati's game. He's a junior, 5'11", 220. I mean, he's a big back. Like, you notice him when you watch Cincinnati. But in terms of his NFL potential, I really haven't studied him too in depth. Michael Warren was a guy there at Cincinnati that has held the backfield for a couple of years. Haven't been too familiar with the Bearcats backfield since Warren left.
Yeah, Jared Dokes got drafted actually last year. Jared Dokes.
Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah.
The Dolphins picked him, and he was similar to what I've seen of Jerome Ford. Like, I don't have a specific grade or round projection for him yet either, but they're both big, powerful backs, and I think again with being in the spotlight, playing in the college football playoff potentially, or just being a team that over the past couple of seasons has been consistently in the top 10. That's great, not just for Desmond Ridder and for Sauce Gardner, the cornerback. It's for other guys getting an opportunity, whether it is in the 6th or the 7th round, or maybe at the undrafted ranks, where Cincinnati of 5, 6, 7 years ago wouldn't, have had as many eyeballs on that program.
Yeah, Cincinnati's a really good team. I mean, they've got a lot of talent on both sides of the ball. Darian Beavers, the linebacker, Kobe Bryant, the corner, opposite of Sauce Gardner, who I think is probably a first-round pick. I don't know where you guys have him, but a lot of talent on that Cincinnati defense, which, is really impressive because they're, not a Power 5 team. So they're recruiting and developing, these 3-star type of talents. And now you've lost your defensive coordinator, Marcus Freeman, to Notre Dame. And it's like they haven't lost a beat. I mean, they've just continued where they left off. So obviously Luke Fickell's doing some great things in that program. And, they're a team that looks like they're going to be in the mix for many years as long as he's there.
No, that's right. It's incredibly difficult to sort of recruit when you're not, SEC, ACC, Pac-12. It's been impressive. Gardner, I like. I wanted him to gain some weight. He gained some weight. He's gotten bigger. His nickname's Sauce, so that's cool. But they do have a really good team. Sanders, I would like to see play a little better, but we can talk about him later. The edge rusher, who I don't know if he's first rounder, but we'll find out together. Debo, we got another question. Oh, Adi Joseph. I know that guy. How good is Jahan Dotson? Jahan Dotson's pretty freaking good. He actually snuck into my first round for the first time this week. I had him going to the Packers. So I love that on a number of levels. Josh, I'll let you start. What do you think of Jahan Dotson?
Well, I think he's fantastic. A guy that is capable of winning at all 3 levels. I mean, he's a bit undersized, but he's not the kind of guy that is just going to be used in gimmick, close to the line of scrimmage type situations. This is a guy that's shown he can play vertically and get down the field and make some big plays. I mean, he did it against Auburn. He's done it in big game situations. Last year, we saw across the NFL this emphasis on getting these quicker type players that are capable of winning at all 3 levels. The Rondale Moores, the Dwayne Eskridges, the Elijah Moores. I mean, there's a laundry list of talents at the wide receiver position. But, man, I want to talk about those Maryland Terrapins because, there's a lot of talent there. I know Adi's a big fan of the Terrapins. You've got Nick Cross, you've got Dante Demas. I mean, lots of talent there at Miami.
I think Adi could have done a better job playing. Adi could have done a better job playing the secondary against Jahan Dotson than what we saw out there. That was tough to watch. He was wide, to quote Bruce Arians, he was wide ass open a lot. Some of that his own doing. A lot of those were questionable coverage decisions. Whoever's. So you mentioned all like the dynamic players like the Rondale Moores and the Eskridges that we've seen. Is he more? He's not incredibly physical, Traps. Is he more Rondale Moore or more Hollywood Brown in terms of what he might bring to the next level?
I think he's more Hollywood Brown because one of my favorite phrases that I heard and I kind of borrowed from some other draft analysts last year on Rondale Moore is that Rondale Moore was short. He wasn't small. Like, he was thick. And if you look at like the body composition, whatever Rondale Moore was, he was like 5'7" or 5'8", but was like around 190 pounds. I don't think you get that yards after the catch ability from Jahan Dotson. He's pretty slippery. He's sudden. But I think you see it more in his routes, which, like you mentioned, Ryan, getting open is so huge in today's NFL. I think he can get open, like Josh mentioned, at all three levels. And if we're going to compare these quarterbacks to previous draft classes, if KJ Hamler can go in the second round, I think Jahan Dotson can. That's probably his floor in terms of how far he would fall. But I think someone that is a little bit smaller, but also plays bigger. There are some really nice contested catches, high points of the football, not even just this year, but last year against Ohio State. So I think Jahan Dotson will probably sneak into the back part of the first round. He's that explosive of a talent.
Debo, are you taking KJ Hamler or Jahan Dotson?
Dotson. I like comparing like these Penn State receivers, and he's the second best receiver I've seen at Penn State after Allen Robinson. I think he's better than Chris Godwin was, who's another second round Penn State pick. So that's kind of where I have him slotted.
Where's JJ Arcega-Whiteside on that list?
I don't think he could start for this Penn State team.
I think that Nick Sirianni agrees with that. That's all I got. So we talked about the quarterbacks. We talked a little bit about the running backs and Jahan Dotson, wide receiver at the end there. Fun stuff. Episode 3 in the books. We'll be back next Tuesday, 1 p.m. So join us then. In the meantime, you can subscribe to the Pick Six podcast, wherever you subscribe to your podcast. You can follow us on YouTube. You can hit the bell notification button so you can hear Will Brinson yell and scream about whatever every time we go live. And in the meantime, guys, we'll talk soon.